Welcome to Empower Her Radio, the space for powerhouse women ready to step into their next level of abundance, purpose, and personal freedom. I'm Dr. Corey Winn, a high performance coach, doctor of physical therapy, philanthropist, and business consultant. I help ambitious women align with their highest calling, expand their wealth and impact, and create a life that feels as good as it looks. If you're a high achieving woman who's built success yet finds yourself craving more alignment, more purpose, more ease, you're in the right place. Here, we bridge the gap between ambition and fulfillment. Through transformative conversations and proven strategies, you'll gain the courage to step into the fullest expression of you. Build a powerhouse business that aligns with your expertise and divine gifts, and lead your life, both personally and professionally, with unshakable confidence, worthiness, and compassion. This is about expansion, legacy, and owning your power unapologetically. You already have everything inside of you to create a life of unlimited possibility. It's time to unlock it. Welcome to your next level. Let's dive in. Today's guest is the embodiment of courage and reinvention. Karen Fabian walked away from the comfort of a six-figure corporate career to follow her passion for teaching yoga. But her path wasn't easy. She faced self-doubt, debt, and an industry full of rigid expectations. Instead of quitting, Karen transformed her story, built a thriving brand, authored books, trained teachers, and created an online community of thousands. She's here to share how we can move from fear and excuses into vision, alignment, and confidence. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to hear your story. Can you really take us back to that moment you decided, I'm done, this isn't for me, I'm going to take this leap?
Yeah, so it was framed less from the I'm done and more from the, oh my God, wow, I didn't even know this was a possibility for me.
Yeah.
And in that moment, what was happening in my life was, as you mentioned, I was deeply ensconced in a corporate job. I had left the clinical setting where I had worked as a social worker and a rehab counselor. I originally thought that I wanted to be a physical therapist, and I know that's your background. I live in Boston. I went to Boston University into their PT program. And about 2.5 years in, I thought, I really want to kind of go into the mind-body aspects of disability. So I got my undergrad in rehab counseling. And then after a couple of years working in the clinical setting, I worked in different business settings in the healthcare space. And I eventually worked my way up to kind of a C-level job. This was many years ago. And I was pretty happy, but I didn't feel a connection, a deep connection to what I was doing. And one day, a good friend of mine invited me to go to a yoga class with him. And I went into this yoga class, and the teacher came in, started to set up. There was this electric buzz in the room, just this sense of almost like a cocktail party. People were chatting with each other, and she came in, and I was watching her as she set up the room. And I was thinking to myself, where did I just embark? Like, where am I right now? What is going to happen? And as soon as she began teaching the class, and we were a few minutes in, I started to think, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. This is this beautiful amalgam of physical therapy and occupational therapy and coaching and anatomy and physical exercise and working with all different kinds of people, overall health and wellness. It sort of ticked all the boxes that were things that I was passionate about. And plus, it had this creative angle to it where you could create a sequence that was, in a way, almost like a song, like an expression of what you wanted to present. And so I took that class, and I know this might sound like something that a lot of yoga teachers say or a lot of people say when they have sort of an epiphany like that, but I truly thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And that really began, that was the spark that began sort of this inferno of activity over the next, I would say, year to 18 months to extricate myself from the lifestyle I had and
Mhm.
create the life I wanted.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And yoga is such a beautiful, beautiful pathway for that. And
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, I'm a physical therapist, but I also have a background in dance.
Hmm.
And
There you
I
go.
vividly remember my very first yoga class. I was
Mm-hmm.
so ignorant to anything about yoga, and a
Mm-hmm.
friend of mine invited me, and I never have felt such a peace, such a feeling of peace and calm
Mm-hmm.
after a
Mm-hmm.
class, and also a feeling of, I think I worked out every muscle in my body. I stretched every muscle in my body. And it was just like, that was exactly what I needed in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, we always ended lying on the floor. And I thought, I never thought that I could be so calm that I felt like you needed to peel me off of the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we've just recently met, but I'm typically a very like high energy person. I don't sit still very well.
Me too.
And to finally be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow. I mean, I didn't know it was possible. And
Yes.
now I'm still very ignorant to yoga, and there's so many different types. But in that moment in that class, I was just like, I had such a huge, profound respect for
Mm-hmm.
the teacher and yoga as a practice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm so glad that you found your passion.
Yes, totally. And I will say that was actually the second yoga class of my life. The first yoga class of my life was about 6 months prior to that, when I had just gone through a divorce and I took myself on this wellness vacation to this resort. And every morning they had this chalkboard out at the breakfast area that said, here are the activities for the day. And one day I saw yoga was on the list, and I went to this yoga class. And if you can imagine, it was in the Caribbean. It was in this yoga room that looked out over the ocean. It was on stilts, so you
Wow.
were like above the ocean. And I went into this room, and the lights were dim, and there were candles. And as we began to practice, I started to cry. I had this intense emotional reaction, which made sense because I was there for a reason related to a big change in my life. But that experience on an emotional level really put the seed in my mind. And then when I went back home to Boston and several months later had the opportunity I just shared with you, those two things together really sealed it for me.
Well, and take us on that journey. Take us on that next step. You know,
Hmm.
you shared a little bit about the yoga's industries, like harsh feedback and rigid rules. So going from like that moment to now, how did you navigate all of that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I had to consider was I the kind of person who could leave a corporate type job and work for myself? And I hadn't worked for myself before. I had sort of done all the standard things that a lot of us do in life. I went to high school, I graduated, I went to college, I went to grad school, I got a job in the clinical setting, I got another job in a different clinical setting, I got a business job, I got another business job. And so I really didn't know, was I even the kind of person who could work for myself? And this was way back in like the early 2000s. And when I took that yoga class and I had this seed planted that this is really my purpose in life, I mean, I really felt that very strongly. So it wasn't even like a question. I thought, this is my purpose. What I did was, the logical side of me said, well, I can't just quit this job and quit this lifestyle. I need to make a spreadsheet. I need to have a project plan. And so that's what I did. So I created essentially a transition plan that allowed me to sell my house, put the money in the bank from the sale of the house, um, start training in the particular studio system where I knew I wanted to teach, doing a whole bunch of like apprenticeship work there. And things over a period of about a year, I downsized to a condo in a part of Boston that was closer to the studio. I put in hours and hours of time volunteering at the studio.
Mhm.
And where it eventually led was I got a job working at the studio where I trained, and I also, as a teacher, and I also worked behind the scenes on the business side. and I lived in a condo. I didn't have the house anymore. I was close to the studio. And I had the money in the bank. So I
Mhm.
had this sort of plan. And at the beginning, everything was really working out. I had achieved my dream of extricating myself from this corporate life, and I had gotten this job in the system, the studio system I wanted. And then after about a year and a half, I started to see the red lights of warning,
Mhm.
primarily from a financial perspective.
Mhm.
The $50,000 was just about gone. I took out a business loan, and the payments I was making were just interest only. I was
Mhm.
dipping into that business loan to cover the mortgage on the condo. My teaching income wasn't increasing, and I
Uh-huh.
was somewhat limited as to what I could do because I was ensconced in this system of somebody else's studio, somebody else's business.
Right.
So it got to the point where I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to have to develop my own brand, my own way of teaching, my own opportunities to teach. And even though I'm leaving the perceived safety of being under someone else's brand, this is going to give me more freedom. And that was the genesis of my own brand, Bare Bones Yoga.
Well, and I just want to step back for just a second and really honor that because so often we as women and men, but specifically my audience is women, we shrink ourselves to fit in a box, whether that's a box of corporate and healthcare under someone else's brand. And being able to step back and say, this no longer aligns, and be able to be true to yourself and take that next leap is often a lot of times where we get
Mm,
stuck. I was just talking with a colleague today about being stuck in that place.
mm,
And it takes courage to be there too. Just like you
mhm,
said, there were financial strains, there were things, a lot of things going on, but being able to be honest with yourself and say, wow, I align better over here. I need
mhm.
this freedom over here. I'm going to take this next leap. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, there were practical considerations because I didn't have the time to create other business opportunities for myself because I was very much working for this other person.
Mhm.
And also on not really an emotional level, but on a philosophical level, there were some things that the studio sort of held out as principles and ways of being for teachers that didn't jive with how I wanted to show up as a teacher. And so, similar to what you said, I sort of had this inner voice saying to me, this isn't exactly how you want to show up. And yet, there's this subtle pressure to fall in line. And additionally, when you look at your ledger book, you're not making enough money and you have these other ideas, but you don't really have the time to
Mhm.
pursue them. So those two things together really is what allowed me to take sort of the next leap, sort of like the version 2.0. And now, of course,
Mhm.
I'm in many iterations beyond that. But that really, those two things combined got me to the next step.
Yeah. So tell us about that new brand. What have you built since then?
Yeah. So what I did at that point was this was right around 2008 when there was this huge economic crash related to mortgages and the housing market. And so a lot of my students were unable to go to class anymore because they couldn't afford it. They were laid off from their jobs. So I had an opportunity to do sort of a pop-up yoga studio in Boston, right behind Fenway Park in this gas station that had been renovated, and it was sort of sitting idle waiting for its next life, but it
Mhm.
looked like a gas station. And
Uh-huh.
yet when you went inside, it was all cleaned out, and it sort of reminded me, if you remember like the old Janet Jackson videos that were sort of industrial looking, it totally
Yeah.
looked like that.
Yeah.
And a
That's
real
so fun.
right? And a real estate friend of mine said, you can have the space until they need it for whatever its next life
Oh,
is.
wow.
And so I called it Bare Bones Yoga. And that implied you're going to bring your own stuff. It's a pop up studio. I literally went to Kinko's and had a banner made and I hung it outside when we were there. And then I charged $10 a class, per person. And we were like thieves in the night. When we were there, we were there. When we weren't, you would never know. And
Mhm.
so that was the genesis of the brand name, but it was affiliated with this brick and mortar space. And after a number of months, when the space went on to become, it actually turned into a tasty burger restaurant for many, many years, but now it's on its next restaurant life. I kept the brand name because my focus is functional movement when I teach.
Mhm.
And my training in anatomy as part of my physical therapy path really developed into training teachers on anatomy and how to apply it to teaching. And I was sought out by other teachers to train that portion of the 200-hour teacher training piece to their
Mhm.
students. And so I started to think bare bones yoga really is a name that reflects that. So I kept the brand even when the brick and mortar went away. And then over the years, it wasn't just that I was teaching classes, I was training teachers on anatomy in other people's trainings. And
Mhm.
then I thought, what if I created an online way to reach teachers all over the world? And this was 2015, long before online learning was popular. I was one of the first people to enroll with a platform up in Vancouver called Thinkific, and I created my first online course at the time.
Mhm.
Now it's basically been upgraded like half a dozen times. And the two primary things I do, I have a group program and I have a one-on-one program. And I crafted a teaching method around anatomy. I call it the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint. And it's 10 steps that focus teachers on just what they need to know and how to apply it to their teaching. And so those are the two programs that I run.
I love that so much. And I think that it's so important from somebody who does have a therapy background and a medical background, when you're out teaching people how to move, having an understanding of the
Mm.
body and the anatomy is incredibly important, I think for two reasons. For you personally, for the client's safety, not the patient's safety, but also it gives you a background knowledge of, something's not right. I think you need to go to your doctor.
Mm.
Or that shouldn't feel that way. Hold on.
Mm.
We're not moving in the right way. And I think that's so valuable and that you can give your clients and the teachers that you teach that extra level of expertise because that also puts the client at ease too of like, okay, you not only know yoga, which is incredibly intensive and very, very powerful teaching, but you also have this little extra piece,
Mhm.
especially for I would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, for clients who maybe have had old injuries or are afraid of stepping into yoga because they do have either maybe a physical disability or something that's not quite right, having that extra layer of knowledge is helpful.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you work with clients one on one, you can really get into customizing the practice for them based on their medical history. And you can even do an assessment prior to meeting with them to really customize things to their needs. And having a background in anatomy is essential there. The other piece, though, for many yoga teachers, and I would say even most yoga teachers, is what they're doing primarily is walking into a room with a bunch of people they don't know who haven't told them anything about their medical history,
Right.
who are not speaking when they're actually doing the practice. And then think about this, the last yoga class you or the listener went to, I would be willing to bet the teacher was doing yoga, probably wasn't even watching the students. And so this further compounds the challenge for really the students when it comes to, is this person watching me? Is this person? And so for yoga teachers, there are many reasons that happens. And in a lot of cases, it's because the initial anatomy training they got was insufficient. There's no industry-wide test that teachers have to take where they need to demonstrate their knowledge. There's a lot of limiting beliefs that yoga teachers experience that bring up feelings of, I don't really deserve to be here, or I'm nervous. And that oftentimes causes them to sort of hide on the yoga mat and just do yoga and say the words that are coming to them from their own movements and sensations in their body. And so it really creates this disconnection.
Mhm.
So I know a lot of that is kind of niche conversation to teachers, but the idea is, and what drives me to do what I do, is when I walk teachers through how easy it is to learn anatomy when you go through my blueprint, they start to come out of their shell and they start to teach in a way that's much more active. And so
Mhm.
just the general shift from I'm not practicing with the class, now I'm watching the class.
Mhm.
I'm using cues where I actually understand what I call the why behind the cue. If someone
Right.
has a question, I can answer it, that sort of thing. So that's for a lot of the teachers, really all the teachers that I work with, really where the transformation happens.
Well, and any type of exercise or movement is critical to do correctly so that you don't injure yourself. And I
Yeah.
mean, not everybody can go to PT school or needs to, let's be very fair with that. And, being in a place where you can really speak to your clients and have them be safe, they're going to keep coming back for years and
Yeah.
years because they know they're in a safe space with someone who's knowledgeable and they're going to continue, elevating their practice as they go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what students experience when they go and take a yoga class is a lot of languaging that's very esoteric, very specific to yoga, sort of gives this perception of you have to be in the know to know what the teacher's saying. And when you
Right.
think of, right, when you think about that from the point of view of the student, it's hard to understand then. And if something's hard to understand, it's hard to implement. And so
Hmm.
a lot of what
Hmm.
I do with yoga teachers is I help them refine their languaging. And I oftentimes say, there's four types of cues: action, alignment, anatomy, and somatic. Stick to action as much as you can so that it's really crystal clear what you want your students to do. And that in and of itself, I don't necessarily want to say it absolutely guarantees they're not going to get hurt. I mean, again, we don't know any of the predispositions of the people coming to our class, but the clearer you are teaching in what you are saying, that you could make a case mitigates risk to some extent.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I also think of yoga as such a huge piece of self-care. So the fact that you've made a brand and a business out of that, how have you been able to take care of yourself in all of these transitions and quantum leaps because you have created something so beautiful? And I know a lot of our audience also is like, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't do that," or "I have too much going on," or immediately gets kind of overwhelmed by, I don't have the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hear that a lot from people. And, if we just sort of maybe just take a step back from yoga teaching specifically, just to women. And, a lot of the women I work with are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and maybe they're teaching yoga as the next thing they want to do with their life. Or
Hmm.
maybe they're working a corporate job and teaching yoga on the side and wondering, is this something that I could eventually do full time and leave the corporate job that I sort of don't feel a lot of passion for? And yet they deal with a lot of what you're talking about. And one of the things that I found in the work I do with yoga teachers, which if I just go up a level, it's really women
Hmm.
and women that are of different age groups. What I would say is, confidence comes up over and over again as one of the things that is required to really take charge of your life. And when I looked at the beginning of this year at the prior year and all the women I'd worked with, I wanted to pull out, sort of tease out what are some of the things that they all shared in terms of how they shifted,
Hmm.
specifically as a yoga teacher, from how they initially came into my program and then the success they had at the end. What were some of the things that they experienced? And what I created out of that analysis was what I call the confidence practice. And I pulled from my review a lot of themes and lessons that I put into a framework, a 6 point framework. And you can kind of think of it like confidence is at the center of the wheel, and the spokes of the wheel are these 6 points.
Hmm.
And they guide people through a way to build your confidence. And
Hmm.
if you'd like, I can just share what those
Yeah, I would
6
love
points
that.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is, if you think again about, I want to live a more confident, empowered life. That's sort of the goal we want to get to. So how do I do that? So if I
Mhm.
look at that as the center of the wheel and the different spokes to create that way of being, that feeling, the first thing is, on a regular basis, I'm not going to say every day, but on a regular basis, do some kind of movement. It could be yoga, it could be running, it could be walking outside. There's so much about movement in general that changes our biology as well as our physiology, as well as our musculoskeletal system. And, we can look at it through a bunch of different lenses, but there's no denying that when you invest in yourself around doing something every day to move your body, that literally will change your brain. And
Yes.
so if you're the kind of person who's struggling with depression, or who is feeling down on yourself, or you have a lack of self-esteem, just the effort of investing in yourself 15 to 20 minutes a day to do something movement based will help you feel a little better. So now you're inching a little closer to the way you want to be. The second thing is, and this is a big part of how I work with women, experimenting with things rather than trying to commit to things. So
Hmm.
think of, for instance, somebody who wants to change the way they eat. Oh, I'm going to cut sugar out of my life for 30 days. And on the third day, they're eating a cupcake, right? So,
Yeah.
right? So instead, what I ask them to do is, if they come with a particular problem, well, what could be an experiment you could do to sort of try on a different way of being that's closer to the way you want to be? So, a
Uh-huh.
very specific yoga teaching example is, teachers oftentimes feel they forget their sequence, but additionally, they change it every week because they feel like, my students are going to get bored. I have to do something new every week. And
Mhm.
that's a belief that's very baked into the yoga narrative that is not true. And so when
Uh-huh.
I work with them, I can't just say to them, oh, don't believe that.
Uh-huh.
Just teach the same sequence, because their belief will rise up and they'll say, oh my God, I could never do that.
Uh-huh.
So I'll say, well, would you be willing to try teaching a similar, if not the same sequence for your next 4 classes? And then
Hmm.
let's get on another coaching call and you can tell me how it went. And every single time the person comes back and they say, oh my God, nobody cared, nobody left, nobody said anything. I don't even think they knew. And what changed is, I didn't have to worry anymore that I was going to forget the sequence. I knew exactly what was coming next. I felt so much more confident. I could walk around the room. I even told a little joke. I could assist. Like, it was this life-changing thing. All from this mindset of, instead of trying to force myself to change, to be the way I want to be, why don't I just experiment with something that maybe is part of the profile of that way I want to be? So that's number two.
Well, and you said just there too, I think what we also have to realize is, as much as we sometimes can think like they're gonna know, they're gonna think they're I'm guessing these clients come once a month or once a week. So much has happened in their life in the last week. I can promise you I will not remember what I did and it be the exact same thing, and also be so thankful that maybe it was the same thing because maybe I remembered a little bit of it.
Right, exactly. And you can sort of look at it both ways. You could say, well, for the student who really enjoys a similar sequence, you're leaving them in the lurch if you change it all the time. And for the students who maybe are a little annoyed that you're doing the same thing, if that helps you feel more confident, why are you pandering to that person? Let that person find a class
Right.
where that teacher doesn't mind using notes, practicing with their students, and feeling like they never know what the heck comes next in their sequence.
Right.
I'm not a teacher for that person.
Right.
But this is just, again, this is part of having less of an attachment to how the other person perceives me and what the other person wants me to do. And instead, taking back your power, being empowered, right?
Yeah.
And saying, I'm going to do what I feel is the best way for me to, in this case, teach the class, so that I feel really good. So that when I'm driving home, I feel like I did a great job without this sort of energetic cord between me and them. And believe me, we're talking about teaching yoga, but that energetic cord can exist between women and their kids, women and their boss, women and their friends. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. The parties you go to that you don't want to, the job you stay in long before or long after you should, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera. So this concept we can sort of apply in different scenarios.
And just the idea that we live in overflow and we live in abundance. Like none of us could ever possibly teach all of the people in the
Of
world
course,
who want to teach or want to have a yoga class.
of course.
So recognizing that the people who are meant to be in your space will flock to you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of how you stand out. You lean into this is who I am.
Mhm.
And you will draw the people that are drawn to your energetic way of being, to the literal way that you teach your class. And that's how you build community. And again, that applies in any situation. So, not just teaching yoga. So, yoga and movement every day or regularly, experimenting. The third thing is self inquiry. And this sort of lives in the area of like journaling. So, even if you're not literally journaling, self inquiry means you're the kind of person who's curious about why you do things the way you do
Mhm.
and always looking sort of outside yourself at how you're reacting to things, how you're interacting with other people, and just being observant. Because the mode of so many of us is to just be in these patterns, be in these
Mhm.
habits, and then going to bed at night and thinking, oh my God, I blew up at the kids, or I had a fight again with that colleague at work. So being the kind of person who builds into their day these moments of self inquiry, especially when you're in a reactive mode, to sort of decompress the situation and look for ways that you can shift your way of being so that you're more sort of gliding through the world without constantly
Mhm.
having your buttons pushed all the time.
Yes. And
And then
that's
the
taking ownership of that.
totally, exactly, right. So the fourth thing is meditation or some kind of practice where you're just in silence. So that could be, of course, literal meditation, but it could also be when I drive home from work, I don't have anything on in the car. When I
Mhm.
get up in the morning, I just take a couple deep breaths in silence. I don't check my phone. So I
Mhm.
don't want to sort of harp on how it's done. Obviously, if you do more of the traditional type of meditation, there are tremendous benefits there, but don't let that be a barrier. What if you went for a 15-minute walk after dinner, which has its own health benefits,
Right.
without your phone and
Right.
just let your ears absorb the sounds around you? That can be, I mean, walking meditation is a thing, right? It's not that it's not a thing. So that you can use that and check the box. So that's number four. And then the last two, the fifth one is visualization, which is taking time. Remember when we were kids and we used to dream about stuff? We used to dream about that doll we wanted, or we used to dream about that kid we liked, or we used to dream about the house we wanted to live in, whatever it was. We did a lot of daydreaming. And then we grew up and we just don't do that anymore. But
Mhm.
now, when you watch TV and you see, for instance, like an athlete achieve this amazing goal, what do they always say? I dreamed this was going to happen.
Uh-huh.
So make visualization part of your day. And for anybody listening who has a vision of what kind of life they want, really invest in thinking about what does that look like? Where am I living? What am I wearing? Who am I interacting with? What resources do I need?
Mhm.
What is stopping me from doing that right now?
Mhm.
Because when you ask yourself that question, the answer that comes back is the problem you need to fix. And it's always fear based. I'm
Yes.
afraid of being judged. I'm afraid I'll lose my money. I'm afraid people will laugh at me, whatever it is. And, I didn't make up that question. That comes from some work I've done in neurolinguistic programming. And there's this framework called the well formed outcome by
Mhm.
Tom Hubar. And he has that as one of the questions, asking yourself, what's preventing me from doing what I want right now? And I
Mhm.
found that to be a showstopper of a question that
Uh-huh.
really, it's very hard to have that question asked of a person and not have their intuition give an answer. Their
Uh-huh.
intuition will always give an answer, whether or not they tell you or not. And I use that question a lot in coaching. And I've seen people just literally burst out into tears because they hear that question and they realize, oh my God, I'm X number of years old and I've let that fear block me all my life, so.
And just that comment resonates so much with me. Something that I ask my clients too, and what so many women no one has asked for so long is, what do you want? No judgment, no, just a question. Well, what do you want? And it's crickets.
Mm.
It's just like, well, nobody's asked me that, especially if you were one of many siblings. Maybe nobody's ever asked you
Right.
that.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think of it too in the context of sometimes when a mother is, has kids and somebody says to the mom, "How are you feeling?" And it's like, you know what? I've been so busy taking care of everybody else, no one's ever asked me how I'm feeling. And so that's where a lot of this self-inquiry and visualization and meditation comes into play. And then the last thing is healthy habits. And there's so many different things that fall into this bucket, but just for now, I'll just leave it as healthy habits integrated into your life, things that resonate with you so that you're always filling your cup. You're not just always, similar to what you just said, you're not just always giving to other people. There are things that you do that fill your cup every day. I have a lot of different things that fall into this bucket, but thinking about what's meaningful to you and making that part of your life. Because honestly, when we talk about things like a healthy lifestyle, it's the healthy habits are like the scaffolding of that lifestyle. And they could be as small as going for a daily walk every day. It doesn't have to be a monumental thing. So just to recap, you've got confidence in the middle, and then you've got yoga or movement on a regular basis, experimenting, you doing these daily challenges, self-inquiry, meditation, visualization, and healthy habits.
I love that so much. And we talk a lot about filling our cups, and a lot of the coaching that I do, we talk a lot about giving from the overflow. And
Mm,
not just giving from a full cup, but like your cup is completely filled, it's overflowing now. Now you can give.
yeah,
And so many of us as women are like, overflow? What overflow?
yeah,
I'm perpetually empty. So
empty,
I'm
right.
so glad that you touched on both the visualization for dreaming as well
Yeah,
as self-care, and really being able to reframe, our whole audience just so needs to hear taking care of yourself is not selfish.
right.
The minute that you can take care of yourself, you can then be a better spouse, a better wife, a better coworker, a better friend, whatever roles you play.
Mhm.
The minute that you take care of yourself first, you are better.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say, and this comes up a lot when I work with people in terms of teaching yoga, I always think that a little bit on a regular basis is, in my mind, always better than every once in a while doing a big thing. So if we just think
Yes.
about that in the context of exercising, if I
Mhm.
do 15 minutes every day versus once a week I do an hour, I'm going to get more benefits just from the consistency of doing something every day, both in terms of my physiology and my sort of psychology
Mhm.
versus just the weekend warrior type thing. But a lot
Yes.
of times I think women, because they are so short on time, they think, well, if I can't carve out even 30 minutes, it's not worth it.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, there's so much evidence out there. I mean, I follow Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and she has a great podcast for listeners out there. And she talks about exercise snacks, this
Mhm.
idea of, you're watching TV, do 10 squats. I mean, I could go on and on.
Oh yeah,
But just
absolutely.
validating that 10 to 15 minutes of something, especially as women age, resistance training, put your weights down by the coffee maker. And while the coffee's being made, do 5 minutes of bicep curls, whatever it is. That checks the box. That's okay. That will help you start to build momentum and start to shift your feeling like I am filling my cup. Maybe it's not overflowing, but I am starting to be the kind of person who does invest in myself,
Yes.
even though I have a family, I have a job, I have a lot of responsibilities.
Well, and being able to take a step back and letting go of the perfectionism, just like you said,
Yeah.
all of a sudden being a weekend warrior or this path has to be perfect. if we can let go of that a little and do a little bit each day. I had a patient years ago with Parkinson's disease. A lot of my career, really most of my career, has worked with neurological diseases, and his spouse came in and said, "I've heard that swimming is the best. You need to tell him he needs to swim every single day," on and on and on. And I remember looking at him and I said, "Do you like to swim?" He said, "No, I'm afraid of the water." And I respectfully looked at the spouse and I said, "I hear you. And I do agree that swimming is an amazing form of exercise. And he's afraid of the water." So I feel like this so coincides with everything that you said, because it's also finding something that you enjoy and
Right,
sticking with it. Any one of us could say, "You should do this or you should do that." Let all of that go
right.
and do something that brings you joy.
Right. Totally. And I mean, when we look at it just from the health point of view, anything is better than nothing when we just look at movement. So whether you're dancing to Justin Timberlake videos or doing jumping jacks when you watch your nighttime reality TV,
Right.
it doesn't, there's so, going horseback riding, going apple picking, all the standard stuff. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it qualifies as movement. I mean, half of what we talk about as people age is concerns about really basic functional movement activities like getting up from the ground when you're sitting down. So, I mean, if you're a mom with a bunch of little kids, play with your kids on the floor and
Yes.
get up and do some movements with them. And honestly, that kind of checks the box in terms of functional movement. You could do, I won't go into all the details, but obviously you know what I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think those kinds of things, they do qualify. And I think, unfortunately, because we live in a social media world, a lot of what we see image wise is the exercise brands, the exercise clothes, the fancy workouts. And, if you want to do it that way, great. But don't beat yourself up if what you're doing is these little exercise snacks in your day.
Yes. Oh, I love this. This has been such a beautiful
Oh,
conversation.
awesome.
If there was like one token or piece of advice or powerful reminder you wanted to give our audience, what would it be?
I would say, the biggest word to me around personal change is momentum. And
Mhm.
momentum, I call it when I work with women, the magic of momentum, because it really is a magical feeling. I think back to when I was a kid and I would watch like Disney movies and that sort of like Tinkerbell like sort of thing with the magical fairy dust. That really is how we often feel when we move closer to being the kind of person we want to be, living the kind of life we want to live. And yet, oftentimes, we're blocked from that because we think it's this mountain we've got to climb. Well, what if we looked at it similar to what we've been talking about this whole time as just a series of little steps, kind of like the yellow brick road, bop, bop,
Mhm.
bop, bop, bop. And
Mhm.
with every subsequent step, we feel good about what we've done. We
Mhm.
look forward to the thing we're going to do next, and we are moving on a path closer to whatever that vision is.
Mhm.
And we feel really good, and it gets easier as we're going down that path. So I would say for anybody listening, just this idea of momentum, and it really just starts with the first step.
Mhm.
Once you do that first step, as small as it is, you're on your way. So don't hold back from just taking that first step.
I love that so much. How can our audience connect with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, so I am Bare Bones Yoga on Instagram, on TikTok, and my website is barebonesyoga.com. And I'll also send you a link to, since we talked about the confidence practice, the framework, I have a free 5-day confidence challenge, which is a
Um,
self-guided experience filled with every day I give you different suggestions for little experiments you could do. And it's a fun way to sort of get the ball rolling along this line of momentum. So I'll send you the link and your listeners can do it. It's a ton of fun.
Absolutely.
People have really loved it.
Yeah, I'll drop it in the show notes. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show
Thank
today.
you. Loved it.
As we close out today's episode, I want to leave you with this. Your next level is already within you. If you're feeling that pull for more clarity, more alignment, and more courage to step fully into who you're meant to be, this is your invitation to take the next step. Whether you're an entrepreneur ready to scale or a woman standing at the edge of something bigger, the path forward starts with trusting your desires, owning your worth, and leading with your inner knowing. This is exactly what I offer: private VIP coaching, and where I guide women inside the 10K Club and 50K Club through consulting with She Sells and Superhuman Selling to help you gain clarity, step into aligned action, and build a life and business that reflects your highest vision. If you're ready to explore what's next, let's have a conversation. Book a free call now at www.corywinn.com/free call. I can't wait to connect with you. Talk soon.